Imagine that everyone around you is a potential enemy, that you can't trust anyone and death lurks around every corner. Imagine having to hide in broad daylight, lying about your identity, and being unable to make friends. This is what happened to Edith Hahn, a Jewish woman who went to unimaginable lengths to escape the clutches of the Nazis and survive the Holocaust. Today, in this new episode, we will tell you her incredible story.
Should I be sorry that I'm not among the dead ones? The Nazis should be ashamed, not me.
Edith Hahn was born on January 24, 1914, in the city of Vienna, Austria, on the eve of World War I. Her father, Leopold, fought in the Austro-Hungarian army and, upon returning from the battlefield, settled with his wife Clotilde, with whom he opened a restaurant. Although they were a Jewish family, the establishment did not serve kosher food. They were not religious and were fully integrated into Austrian society, despite the growing anti-Semitic movement. Edith was the eldest of 3 sisters and stood out as a reading enthusiast from a young age. She even persuaded her father, against the norm of the time, to send her to school, where it wasn't common for women to receive a formal education.
I was very interested in philosophy, and at the age of 17 I gave a talk about Nietzsche in our class.
The girl was passionate about political debates and discussions about the country's current state. She believed that through education, she could find a way to heal the nation's ills. Some sensed that dark days were approaching, as in neighboring Germany, Adolf Hitler's National Socialist movement was gaining momentum. One of its central proposals was to annex Austria and integrate it into a greater German empire. In 1931, still a teenager, Edith joined the Socialist Party, driven by ideals of social justice and wealth redistribution. It was there that she met one of the most important men in her life, Joseph Rosenfeld, also known as Pepe. He was an 18-year-old, a year older than her, deeply intellectual and committed to the leftist cause. They fell in love immediately, and together managed to enroll as law students at the University of Vienna. However, not everything was rosy. In the following years, the social and political atmosphere heated up with Hitler's rise to power in 1933, and 3 years later, Edith received the toughest news. Her father, Leopold, died suddenly while working in the restaurant. As her life entered a crisis, the social situation became even more complex. In March 1938, the Führer launched the Anschluss, his plan to absorb Austria. The Austrian annexation was swiftly executed amid a wave of violence unleashed by Austrian Nazis and Wehrmacht troops who invaded the country. From then on, anti-Semitism only escalated. Street assaults became commonplace, and it was not uncommon to see a Jew forced to kneel and scrub the floor, while a group of people insulted, humiliated, and even beat them. Edith and her boyfriend decided to stay together in Austria, but soon our protagonist learned that Jews were no longer allowed to attend university. Higher education was now a privilege of the Aryan race, and she did not fall into this category. Eventually, the girl and her mother were evicted from their apartment and forced to move to the ghetto in Vienna. When World War II broke out, Edith tried to convince herself that the conflict would be short-lived, that Germany would be defeated in a matter of months, and that everything would quickly return to normal. However, things would not be so simple. In 1941, she was informed that her mother would be sent to do forced labor on a farm. The young woman argued the measure with a Nazi court, stating that her mother was too old to withstand these tasks. Hitler's bureaucrats agreed, but in return, they decided that Edith herself would replace her mother in slave labor. She had to report to the train station the next day to march to an asparagus plantation in Ostenburgo, Germany. Otherwise, she would be sought by the justice system as if she were a criminal. That's how she had to say goodbye to her mother and head towards a destination of misery and pain.
To go away from my mother was hard for me. We were very close. And I hoped that it was for 6 weeks. It worked out to be 13 months. This was the last time I saw my mother.
Once on the farm, she was forced to work on the plantation every day in rain or unbearable heat, from 4 in the morning until dusk. The only way she found to maintain her sanity was to write hundreds of letters to her sisters, her mother, and Pepe, her boyfriend, from whom she had also been separated. In 1942, she was allowed to return to Vienna, but upon arriving in the city, she learned that 2 weeks earlier, her mother had been deported to Poland, which was also occupied by the Nazis. Tired of being discriminated against as a Jew, Edith tore off the yellow star they forced her to wear for identification. This way, she went into hiding, contradicting the regulations of the National Socialist government. This also marked the end of her relationship with Pepe, who left her because he was convinced that she was putting both of them at risk.
I felt betrayed, and forsaken, abandoned. And this is why I made up my mind. This was my reaction. Whatever happens, never to marry him.
Rejected by her ex-boyfriend, Edith had nowhere to stay. She lived like a vagabond and even thought that it might be best to surrender to the SS. Fortunately, help came from an unexpected source. A childhood neighbor, a Christian girl named Christa Denner, offered to help her escape from Austria. To do so, they devised a plan as original as it was dangerous. The odds of being caught were high, and if that happened, both women knew they could consider themselves dead. In July 1942, Christa went to the Vienna police station, where she reported that she had lost her identification in the Danube River. In reality, this was a lie. The papers were in Edith's hands. The police believed the story and issued a duplicate to Christa. From that moment on, our protagonist had the means to assume the identity of her Christian friend and leave behind Nazi mistreatment and cruelty. However, to avoid the truth being discovered, it was necessary for her to leave Austria as soon as possible. Otherwise, the chances of being discovered were much higher, and in that case, both would be sent to a concentration camp. She first headed to the city of Munich, where she got a job as a nurse's assistant in the German Red Cross. She was a fugitive Jew hiding in broad daylight, lying daily to survive, unsure whom she could trust. She only felt safe in art galleries, where she could blend in with the anonymous crowd. On one of these visits, she met a tall, blonde young man named Werner Vetter, who sat next to her to admire a painting. He had little knowledge of art, but made an effort to engage her in conversation. Despite the romantic scene, there was a problem. The guy was a Nazi dressed in a suit and wearing a swastika pin. This meant he was not only a sympathizer of National Socialism, but also a party member. However, the attraction was so strong that Edith decided to break one of her main rules, which was not to see the same person twice to avoid mistakes. That's how she started dating Werner, who captivated her with his kindness and gentlemanly manners. The man had been exempted from military service due to a motorcycle accident that left him blind in one eye. He had no close contact with the Wehrmacht, but worked in a Luftwaffe factory designing airplane models. 2 months after they met, he invited Edith to a restaurant and proposed to her. Tearfully, she told him she couldn't, and that's when she decided to reveal her identity to him. She approached his ear and, in whispers, told him she was Jewish. Surprisingly, Werner also had hidden a secret.
He confessed to me that he was not telling me the truth in the summer about himself, and confessed to me that he is married and is in divorce proceedings. And he confessed to me. He told me lies and I told him lies. He stuck to his proposal and wanted to marry me.
Edith agreed, and together they headed to Brandenburg, where they bought a house. Her new husband was a demanding man, expecting her to behave like a traditional housewife, cooking and cleaning for him. They never spoke again about her past. For Werner, her being Jewish was not a relevant detail. The young woman was content to stay confined at home, avoiding contact with others for fear of being discovered. She steered clear of shops where it was mandatory to give the Nazi salute and convinced her husband not to place a photo of Hitler inside the house. Eventually, she became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter, Angelika, in 1944, just as the Third Reich was nearing its end. During childbirth, Edith refused painkillers, fearing they might reveal her identity to the doctors while under sedation. In September 1944, Werner was forced to join the German army. Hitler's empire was cornered by the Allies, and in desperation, they recruited all men old enough to hold a weapon, regardless of age or physical condition. Surprisingly, our Jewish protagonist had become the wife of a Nazi officer. In 1945, as concentration camps were liberated, the German population learned about the horrors within those places. Images of skeletal prisoners and mountains of corpses shocked the world and caused great distress. For Edith, it was an opportunity to question her relationship with Werner, who had never worked in a camp but was a fervent Nazi supporter. However, in March of that same year, her husband was captured by the Red Army and sent to a Siberian gulag. In May 1945, Germany declared surrender. With the end of the National Socialist dictatorship, Edith stopped hiding under the identity of her friend, Christa Denner, and started using her real name again. Soviet occupation authorities gave her a job as a judge in the Brandenburg court. Thanks to her new position, she managed to have Werner released from prison in 1947. He returned to his wife, but things had changed. Edith did not want to remain married to a Nazi, and they soon divorced. Shortly after, our protagonist learned that her mother had been killed in Poland during the war. In the following years, Edith dedicated herself to raising her daughter, concealing her father's Nazi past and everything she had suffered in her youth. She planned to stay in East Germany, but the Soviet government tried to recruit her as an informant for the KGB. Fearing this could be dangerous for her daughter, Edith chose to leave the country and head to London. There, she started a new life working as a domestic servant and seamstress. In 1957, she married Fred Beer, a Jewish jewelry salesman who had also lost his mother in the Holocaust. Over time, she could tell her daughter the truth, and in 1999, at the age of 85, she published her autobiography titled The Wife of the Nazi Officer.
I've seen good everywhere, yes. And I have survived only because people were decent to me. Nazis even. I learned much about people, about reactions of people. That human nature is not fixed.
Edith passed away in 2009 in London at the age of 95. Her letters and personal documentation were donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where they remain today. We've reached the end of the video. Leave your comments down below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more military events that left their mark on history.